Okay, we're about two after. We've got a bunch of people on and still joining. Welcome to those just joining. I'm sure some will continue to trickle in, but we're going to go ahead and get started. So welcome again, everyone, and thanks for joining us for what promises to be an excellent and informative webinar about building decarbonization in the great state of Connecticut. Our panelists have a wealth of knowledge about the policy and regulatory efforts happening there. Have a ton of lessons learned to share. We're going to hear all about the lay of the land in Connecticut. We're going to hear about future of gas and other utility-related dockets. We're going to hear about thermal energy networks and legislative efforts. It's going to be really great. Looking forward to a great conversation. My name is Matt Casale. I am Director of State Mobilization at the Building Decarbonization Coalition, or BDC. I am not based in Connecticut, but I am in Massachusetts, right across the Connecticut border. So has a special place in my heart, shop in Connecticut all the time. All right, we can move to the next slide. Okay, for those of you who are new to BDC, BDC aligns building industry stakeholders like manufacturers, builders, contractors, workers, environmental groups, environmental justice organizations, utilities, local governments, etc., all to electrify the building sector through public policy, consumer inspiration, and market transformation and research. Welcome to all of our members, and for those who wish to learn more about membership, and it's free, feel free to visit our website. The link is right there. Move to the next slide. And before we get started, special thank you to our Trailblazer members who help make all of this work possible. See them up on the screen now. Thanks to all of you who joined us today. Before we get into logistics, I'll just note that this is also part of a series of webinars where we spotlight policy progress, success, and challenges from different states. On our website, you can find past recordings, summaries of past webinars on all kinds of interesting topics and a bunch of different states across the country. So don't hesitate to head over there. Okay, get it started in just a second. But first, just on the logistical side, just to note, everyone is muted, but feel free to use the chat to get your questions in throughout. We will have a Q&A at the end, so we'll be collecting those questions throughout. You can also leave any comments you have that you want the whole group to see in the chat, and we'll compile the questions and save some time at the end. Like I said, for Q&A, we'll also have them afterwards in case we can't get to all of them. The webinar is being recorded and will be available on our website and emailed out to all attendees. Next slide. Okay, here's the agenda for the webinar. We're gonna introduce our panelists and hear some great presentations from them, and then we'll launch into the Q&A and discussion. You can see our panelists here. We've got Shannon Laun from Conservation Law Foundation, Tom Wiehl from the Connecticut Office of Consumer Counsel, and State Rep Stephen Winter, who's also the Executive Director of Climate and Sustainability for the City of New Haven. I'll give a bit longer bios before each of them speaks. So I'll start with Shannon right now, who's going to be our first speaker. Shannon Laun is Vice President for Connecticut of Conservation Law Foundation. Her work focuses on using legal and policy solutions to address climate change, facilitate transition to a clean energy economy, and reduce harmful pollution that threatens human health and the environment. Before joining CLF as staff attorney in early 2021, Shannon worked as an attorney with the Western Environmental Law Center and Connecticut Fund for the Environment, which is now Save the Sound, and served as a legal fellow with the Environmental Law Institute and Environmental Defense Fund. Shannon holds a JD from Harvard Law School and a BA summa cum laude from the University of California, Los Angeles. She is admitted to practice law in Connecticut, New York, and several federal courts. She lives in Connecticut with her husband, her daughters, and her 3 cats, where they enjoy watching the abundant local wildlife and seasonal changes in the woods around their home. Shannon, like I said, has a wealth of knowledge, so I'm really looking forward to your presentation. Take it away, Shannon.
Great, thank you so much, Matt. You can go ahead and advance the slide. So a bit of background about CLF. We are a regional environmental advocacy NGO that is based in Boston, but we have offices in all 6 of the New England states. And our advocacy includes a range of things from litigation, public utility commission dockets, regulatory and policy proceedings, and so on. Next slide. Thank you, Matt, for the great bio. A bit more about me. As Matt mentioned, I lead CLF's advocacy in Connecticut. And among other things, I serve as counsel for utility commission dockets and regulatory proceedings that involve the gas system and the building sector. And I've been leading the Beyond Gas Connecticut Coalition since we started in 2021. Next slide. So I'm going to give a bit of a background and overview of the Connecticut building sector, the emissions, and the regulatory landscape. Next slide. So first, the geographic context. Connecticut's a small state, southern New England. We are sandwiched between our much more ambitious neighbors, New York and Massachusetts, which have really been leading the way in a lot of building sector decarbonization work. Sadly, Connecticut is not as far advanced as we'll talk about on this call, but that's the geographic context. And we are part of the regional ISO New England grid. Next slide. So the housing stock in Connecticut, like much of the Northeast, tends to be older, and a lot of homes are poorly insulated. So we have a big need for weatherization improvements. And weatherization barriers are all too common, especially in our low-income communities. Next slide. And moving on to building sector emissions. So using fossil fuels in residential and commercial buildings is a substantial source of pollution in Connecticut. That accounts for about 1/3 of our greenhouse gas emissions and about 23% of NOx in Connecticut. And unfortunately, we've made really limited progress to date. So the emissions from buildings have actually increased in recent years, and they remain near 1990 levels. Next slide. So here's a chart showing the greenhouse gas emissions in Connecticut by sector. You can see the dark blue line is residential, purple is commercial, and those are currently the 2nd and 3rd largest sources of greenhouse gas emissions in the state, behind only transportation. Next slide. So next, moving on to the sources of heating in Connecticut. Like in many states, we remain heavily dependent on fossil fuel combustion for heating. So about 37% of households use methane gas, another 34% use heating oil, which is relatively rare in most of the country, but is still pretty common across much of New England. And then another 6% use propane. For electric resistance, it's around 16%. And of course, that tends to be expensive and very inefficient. So we're trying to shift folks to highly efficient electric heat pumps. Unfortunately, the data is not great, but the best estimates that I could get is about 4% of households using heat pumps in Connecticut. Next slide. And here's another chart. This shows the relative level of emissions from fossil fuels used for heating in the residential sector. So you can see heating oil up at the top, closely followed by methane gas, and then propane down at the bottom. Next slide. So what are the economics of electrification in Connecticut? The good news is that it is currently cost effective for folks to switch to electric heat pumps from heating oil, propane, or electric resistance heating. The bad news is that it is still more expensive for people to switch from gas. So as a result, our state regulators and policymakers have generally focused on prioritizing heat pump adoption where the economics already make sense. Next page. Okay, next we want to talk a bit about the regulatory landscape. So Connecticut has a state climate law, the Global Warming Solutions Act. This was originally passed back in 2008. It's been updated a couple of times. There's currently a bill pending that may make some further changes. But currently, this law requires statewide greenhouse gas reductions at least 45% by 2030 and at least 80% by 2050. The state did meet our relatively easy 2020 target, but that was largely due to the pandemic. And unfortunately, the state is nowhere near on track to meet these longer term targets. And a few drawbacks to our state climate law. We do not have any sector-specific targets. It is not explicitly enforceable, and the law does not require or authorize our state energy and environmental agency to adopt implementing regulations. So these have all been holding the state back in climate law implementation. Next slide. So a bit more about the building sector. The first thing to note is that back in 2013, the state decided it would be a great idea to expand the gas system. And so we had what was envisioned as a 10-year gas system expansion plan. The idea was that we would convert people from heating oil to methane gas. That was in effect for a number of years, and the good news is that it was terminated early by the Public Utilities Regulatory Authority, which is our state Public Utility Commission. And they found that not only was it not cost effective, but that plan was not consistent with our state clean energy and climate goals. So thankfully, that is no longer in effect. We also have the Comprehensive Energy Strategy, or the CES. This is required pursuant to statute, and our most recent iteration is from 2018. The state kicked off the process for a new CES back in 2022. We had rounds of public comment, technical meetings, and then we never got a draft. It's been more than 2 years now, and this process is still delayed. We don't even have a draft. And the reason I'm highlighting it here is the intention for the 2022 CES is that it would provide a comprehensive blueprint for how we decarbonize the building sector. To date, the state has really not developed a comprehensive plan for buildings. This was going to be it. And again, we've been waiting on it for over 2 years. So that's really been holding us back. The state has made some progress in incorporating equity into our energy efficiency programs. So the Equitable Energy Efficiency, or E3 program, is being implemented, although somewhat sporadically. Next slide. So a bit more about our existing policies and programs. Connecticut is the lead state agency for the Regional New England Heat Pump Accelerator. This is using federal funding and aims to boost the adoption of cold climate heat pumps across New England. That is moving forward. We also have our 3-year energy efficiency plan, the Conservation and Load Management Plan, and that provides home energy audits, weatherization services, and also supports electrification with rebates for heat pumps and so on. And finally, we do have the Connecticut Green Bank, which offers financing programs. Next slide. Thank you. So I think the key takeaway for Connecticut is that additional regulatory frameworks are critically needed here to advance building sector electrification. Next slide. So what we don't have, we do not yet have a future of gas proceeding, although that's something that folks have been advocating for years, hasn't happened yet. We also don't have any requirements that the utilities consider non-pipeline alternatives, including thermal energy networks. And we don't have any requirements for long-term gas planning or integrated gas electric system planning. Next slide. So here in this map, you can see that Connecticut is really an outlier in the Northeast for not having a future of gas proceeding. All of our nearest neighbors have either completed or pending proceedings. And actually, just as of last week, Maine initiated their future of gas proceeding. So Connecticut is really kind of a regional laggard in this regard. Next slide. So I talked a bit about some of the challenges we're facing in Connecticut. I'll go into a bit more detail here. Next slide, please. So first, across New England and in Connecticut in particular, we have high electricity costs. So obviously this is a big barrier to electrification. There's been a fair bit of public outrage over high electricity bills and a small but vocal minority. And unfortunately, this has led to some ongoing attempts at our legislature to really eviscerate our ratepayer-funded public benefits programs, which support weatherization, energy efficiency, and electrification. Next slide. We also have really suffered from a lack of political leadership. So our governor, Ned Lamont, has been a proponent of gas expansion. And although we have some great climate champions in the legislature, our legislative leadership has really not been visionary around the need for climate action and clean energy and electrification. And as a result, our state environmental and energy agency, Connecticut DEEP, really has not provided sufficiently clear policy direction on how we decarbonize buildings and move towards electrification. And lastly, although our Public Utility Commission is great and has fantastic leadership, they've really been reluctant to take initiative to advance electrification in the absence of political support. Next slide. Last, I'm going to close on a few opportunities. Next slide, please. So there are some ongoing efforts to advance electrification of buildings in Connecticut. The first thing I wanted to highlight is that Eversource, which is one of our large gas and electric utilities, has proposed a thermal energy network pilot for new construction in their pending gas rate case. And CLF and the Office of Consumer Counsel have been advocating for the Public Utility Commission to move forward with the future of gas docket and require the consideration of non-pipeline alternatives through our advocacy in that rate case. Over the legislature, we've had bills passed out of committee that would require a future of gas proceeding and would establish thermal energy network programs. And lastly, advocates have been pushing for zero interest loan programs at the Connecticut Great Bank. Next slide. And that's all for me. I'll pass it on to the next presenter. Thank you.
Thanks, Shannon. Make sure to get your questions for Shannon in the chat. Looking forward to a little more conversation about a lot of that. But first, we'll turn now to Thomas Wiehl. Tom is the Legal and Regulatory Director at the Office of Consumer Counsel, the Connecticut State agency charged with representing the interests of consumers in all matters related to regulated electric, gas, water, and telecommunications utilities. Prior to joining OCC, Tom was an executive for a private Connecticut corporation in the energy sector and started his law career as a public defender in Springfield, Massachusetts, my neighborhood. Tom is a graduate of the University of Connecticut School of Law and lives in Madison, Connecticut with his wife and 2 sons. All right, Tom, take it away.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. As Matt just said, my name's Tom. I am at the OCC, as we call it, the Connecticut Office of Consumer Counsel. Next slide. Matt kind of gave an overview of what we do, but that's what this slide is about. So maybe with some more specificity. Probably most people on this call are aware of offices like ours across the country, but just for background, there was sort of in the 1970s, in the wake of this 1970s energy crisis, there was sort of this national outcry about gasoline prices and utility rates, which kind of caused a firestorm across the country of offices just like mine starting up. So our office was founded in 1975. This year is our 50th anniversary. And the purpose of our office was to meet the demand for there to be essentially someone else in the room when utilities are requesting rate increases. The perception at that time was that there was no actual process and that the people didn't have a representative, specifically in rate cases. Over the past 50 years, our advocacy has extended beyond rate cases, although that is still our bread and butter. We're still very much into doing rate cases, but as you see here, we're involved in PURA dockets, inclusive of rate cases, but really most every docket that PURA has going on, whether it's sort of a policy design docket or a rate making docket, we're involved in it. We also get to appear in any state or federal court proceeding that has any impact at all on ratepayers. So we are heavily involved in the growing list of appeals that are arising out of our PUC's decisions, which primarily the appeals are primarily filed by utilities who are not happy with those decisions. So we have been primarily supporting those decisions in the courts. We're involved with DEEP, our Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. We are involved in legislative advocacy. We also do have a role at FERC, which is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, as well as ISO New England and some of the other regional advocacy areas. So that's next slide. That's just a picture of sort of who we are. This slide is intended to illustrate, from my perspective at least, that our job is tough because we have to balance competing interests. Like the central interest I feel like we're constantly balancing is to get customers the services and infrastructure they want and need, but also to resist the monopoly forces of regulated utilities to build such infrastructure and provide such services without the cost controls that are naturally accompany, market competition. So these companies have no competition. Our customers, our constituents can't choose to use a different electricity delivery company, for example. So the only force kind of resisting against the impulse to not overcharge for services, essentially, is the OCC. And again, that is in itself, in some ways, in conflict with our mission to get people the things that they need, because sometimes we're in a position where we're pushing back against proposals from utilities that are framed as these are the things that customers need. We also do represent the interests of all ratepayers in Connecticut, including commercial and industrial ratepayers. We do, though, exercise our statutory authority to determine positions that most benefit, frankly, the ratepayers who need, from our perspective, the most advocacy, whose voices need to be amplified in these conversations. So next slide. I wanted to kind of give this really basic rate lesson. It's the most basic idea of rate making, but it's pretty pertinent to something I'm going to talk about with respect to gas and the future of gas everywhere, including in Connecticut, which are that basically rates are made up of two things. They're made up of the cost that the utility incurs in providing service, both capital expenses and operational costs. That creates the revenue requirement. So like how much money the utility needs to collect in a given year. That's the total cost of service. And then the sales is just how you divide that total cost of service, that big, gigantic $100 million number. How many people are you dividing that up among? That's what gives you your rate. So those two things kind of put different directional pressures on the rates themselves. The higher the cost of service, the higher the rates, but the more sales there are to kind of distribute those costs among, all else equal, the lower the rates. Next slide. And that'll be relevant in a second when I kind of get towards the bottom here. But this slide's just to sort of talk about electric and gas customers. We represent both of them, and there are some sort of tensions inherent between those two customers and those two industries. So to begin with, as Shannon was discussing, we do still have a significant amount of heating in Connecticut comes from methane, from natural gas. Also, our electric generation mix is primarily still from natural gas in Connecticut. It's sometimes around when I checked when I made the slide, it was 60% at the time, according to ISO, but those two energy sources both compete primarily for that same resource. And that, moving on down the slide here, creates an interesting dynamic between the pricing for those two resources here in Connecticut, which kind of exacerbates what Shannon was talking about before, of a barrier to electrification here in Connecticut. It's especially tough to shift from natural gas to electrification, because as the price of natural gas increases, which would otherwise be an incentive to move from natural gas, so does the price of electricity, which is driven by the price of natural gas. So in my mind, that's part of like what makes it especially difficult to have a conversation about how to effectuate if we're going to have this electrification transition specifically for natural gas customers. It makes it tough, especially makes it tough to kind of figure this out without having a plan. Again, we represent all customers. We do represent customers who have gas and want to continue to have gas. A note here, I'm sure everyone on this call understands, lots of gas customers have no alternative, either because they rent or they simply don't have the resources to transition without, a plan or a way to facilitate a transition to something else. Electric customers are also obviously interested in reliable service at the lowest costs. And also we obviously represent the interests of customers who are seeking to transition from gas to electricity. And ultimately our goal, I think, in representing all of those interests, which can diverge or there are just different interests at different times, is that everyone should have it should have ideally equitable access to different energy options. Next slide. So, but as Shannon noted, we do have state decarbonization goals. It is our perspective that we cannot meet those state decarbonization goals with the natural gas industry continuing on the track that it has been on for the last century, that in order to meet those decarbonization goals, there needs to be a change, and that will necessitate likely a transition from natural gas to electrification. And I just wanted to kind of highlight two rate-making impacts of that transition that that concern us. The first is just the prospect of stranded investments, which is just the basic idea that if gas companies continue to invest in their capital infrastructure without any kind of planning for the possibility that there will be reduced demand in the future, every dollar that we invest in the system now kind of echoes through decades, sometimes up to 40 years of the useful life of an asset that's put in the ground. That gets paid for whether it's used in 30 years or not. Like whether if an investment is made now and ultimately isn't used 5 years from now, the ultimate value of that investment still needs to be recovered from ratepayers. That's an immovable piece of the problem here. It's part of the Constitution, as I say here. So that's part of the reason why we feel it's so important to have a conversation about adjusting the capital planning that's happening at these gas companies, because it doesn't appear from our perspective like there is a forward-looking view that's protective of ratepayer interests in the long term. Next slide. And the other issue is that the kind of practical issue of if gas customers are going to transition to electrification, if there is no organized plan or any kind of intervention at the state level, regulatory or statutory intervention, as I say here, what will naturally occur is that the highest income customers will be able to transition first. And the problem with that is, well, there are several problems with that, but the problem with that relates back to that slide that I started with, which is that the fixed costs of the infrastructure in the ground don't change as those highest income customers are able to leave the gas system and to switch to electricity. And that top line that I said before, the revenue requirement, if that stays the same, but the number of customers reduces, that means rates go up, and rates will continue to go up as fewer and fewer customers are on that system. And if only the highest income level customers are able to transition first, that leaves fewer and fewer people to cover those costs, and those people have lower and lower levels of income. And it's just not, from our perspective, a feasible or workable solution. Like, this is a massive problem stretching out over the next few decades that needs a solution, because this just isn't going to, I mean, A, it's a horrifying prospect for those low income customers, and B, it's practically just not going to work. Like, we're going to hit a wall where these companies aren't going to be able to recover these costs. Next slide. So this slide is sort of what have we been trying to do about it. This is a list. Hopefully, if you're interested, you can click on these links and take a look. We've got a couple of rate cases with testimonies and briefs kind of touching on this here. PURA in Connecticut is also undergoing a performance-based regulation framework. There are a couple of relevant links here, and there are also, as I think Representative Winter is going to talk about in a second, some legislative movement on this during this session. So we've got links to some of our testimony on a few of the bills that he's going to talk about. And I think that's my next slide. That's all I've got. So thanks for your time, and I'll pass it on to the next presenter.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate that you have a slide that shows just how difficult your work at OCC is, although I think we all knew that coming in and recognized that. Okay, we'll turn now to Stephen Winter. Steve is the Executive Director of Climate and Sustainability at the City of New Haven and represents the 94th Assembly District in Connecticut's House of Representatives. In his role with the city, Steve is leading the city's effort to construct a geothermal-based thermal energy network, which I'm sure we're all excited to hear about, and has launched partnerships to increase participation in energy efficiency and home electrification for New Haven residents. And as state representative, Steve serves on the Energy and Technology Committee and has supported legislation to foster the development of thermal energy networks, adopt an energy efficiency stretch code, and remove health and safety barriers to energy efficiency improvements. Go ahead, Steve, all yours.
All right, thanks everyone. Hi, I'm Steve Winter. Like was said, I wear two hats. So first, with my state legislator hat on, I can give an update on some of the legislation that Tom mentioned, where things stand with a few weeks left to go in the legislative session. Next slide, please. So we've had one climate and environmental bill that's passed out of the House on May 1st, and that was House Bill 5004, which increases the state's greenhouse gas emissions reduction goal or requirement and includes a new interim goal. So previously, our 2050 goal was an 80% reduction from 2001. If this bill passes the Senate and gets signed into law, we would have a net zero goal for 2050 and an interim goal of a 65% reduction from 2001 levels for 2040. There's also language in this bill that would allow the Department of Administrative Services, which approves school construction grants and reimbursements from municipalities, to approve air source and ground source heat pumps as like part of a routine application, which would be really helpful for school districts that are interested in electrifying their schools and other facilities. There's also a plan for Department of Administrative Services, a requirement for a plan and a budget for building decarbonization retrofits, as well as expanding the eligibility for previously authorized funds for grants and loans to income eligible residents for housing retrofits. Next slide, please. So that's all the things that passed out of the House version, and this is a list of things that were removed from the House bill and are now would now have to find a home in another piece of legislation. One is a uncontested proceeding on the future of the natural gas distribution system. That was removed from the bill. Another was a requirement to establish a thermal energy network pilot program with gas utilities required to file 1 or 2 pilot projects, and for PURA to consider what an appropriate cost recovery methodology would be for the pilot projects, as well as study the economic feasibility of those pilot projects and look into how to best deploy thermal energy networks. There was also language taken out of 5004, which would have provided gas company incentives for municipally owned thermal energy networks, and an authorization for the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection to solicit proposals for gas demand response. So all of these, I think all of these issues in one way or another relate to concerns, I think, in the legislature around potential costs that could be imposed on ratepayers in the shift away from fossil fuels. And I hope that we can find homes for these components in other places. One of the main bills that's being negotiated out of the Energy and Technology Committee is Senate Bill 4. And if you go to the next slide, we could talk a little bit about the version that passed out of committee. So the version that passed out of committee has some similar language to the utility scale thermal energy network program that 5004 has. It's explicit, though, in the version that passed out of committee about proving recovery of prudently incurred costs through rates. There's the same authorization for gas demand response, but there isn't any language about future of gas, so that would have to be added to the bill. And there's no requirement for gas company incentives for municipally owned thermal energy networks. But this would, if this version were to proceed, it would put us on a pathway to pilot thermal energy networks and explicitly authorize the regulated gas utilities to utilize geothermal-based thermal energy networks. If you could go to the next slide, please. So part of the challenge here is because electricity rates are so high, we're up near the top of the the list in terms of the continental United States. There's been a lot of concern about cost in the legislature this session, including a rival bill, SB 1560, which would do several things with the goal at least of trying to reduce costs. I think in some ways it might, some ways it might not, including creating a new energy procurement supply agency, really gutting net metering for solar, and the proposal of shifting programs like the energy efficiency programs in the conservation and load management program to off of the electric bill and to pay for that through bonding. So I think the bottom line here is it's challenging politically right now to do anything that's perceived to be increasing costs in the short term, even if we think we're on solid ground or reasonable ground to estimate that in the long run it'll reduce costs. So, for example, the provisions around gas demand response and efficiency in SB4, the Office of Fiscal Analysis estimates would reduce utility bills, and they think that thermal energy networks might as well. Next slide, please. There's another bill which had a public hearing but didn't get a vote out of committee, but could make it into another bill, which would establish a grant or loan program for thermal energy networks that could be available for feasibility, design, or implementation. So it's possible that something like that could be funded through bonding if it were to make it into another bill. Next slide, please. So with that, I'll turn my attention to New Haven, where I wear my other hat as the Director of Climate and Sustainability. We have an exciting project that we call the Union Station Area Thermal Energy Network, or USA 10. We're really focused on climate mitigation and adaptation strategies that can address the immediate needs of residents, energy affordability, and in tandem, affordable housing are part of that. And the geothermal proposal, we were fortunate enough to get funding through the IRA, which we still have access to. Next slide, please. So the Union Station Area Thermal Energy Network, or the best acronym ever, USA 10, how patriotic is that, is a network geothermal system that would provide clean heating and cooling to our main train station, Union Station, which is the 8th busiest Amtrak station in the United States. How about that? As well as housing to be developed across the street from the station. So you can see on this image, there was a large housing development that was demolished a few years ago, and that Housing Authority of New Haven recently purchased that property and is planning to build between 2,000 and 2,500 units. What we proposed would help provide clean heating and cooling to the first phase, which is about 1,000 units. Next slide, please. So I mentioned we were able to get funding through the IRA, through the EPA's Climate Pollution Reduction Program. And this is a partnership between the city, its Housing Authority, Elm City Communities, CTDOT, and the Parking Authority, which manages the train station. Next slide, please. This is just a quick summary of the projected greenhouse gas and air pollution avoidance from the project. It's pretty significant. We have a lot of air quality problems in New Haven, being where two interstates meet and getting a lot of polluted air blowing in from New York and places further west. Next slide, please. So the funding wouldn't just come from the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program. We're also going to try to take advantage of the investment tax credit at the federal level and some Energize Connecticut state energy efficiency rebates. Next slide, please. So this is just a quick timeline of the project. Currently, we're procuring an engineering firm to design the system. and working with the Connecticut Green Bank on finalizing a loan agreement so that we can borrow funds and seek reimbursement through the IRA once the project is put into service. And I think that's the end of my talk. All right, great. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Exciting stuff. Let's bring all of the panelists up now, and we can move into the discussion and question and answer. And feel free to continue to add your questions to the chat. I'll start with one for this is for each of you. You know, as you all mentioned, I think there are some unique challenges in Connecticut. There are some things that make it more difficult or challenging, or other things in Connecticut that, you know, help the movement. But at the same time, there are a lot of states that are in similar places, right? You know, may have an emissions reduction target, but not sector specific, and haven't made a lot of progress. What do you think from your work are some lessons other states can learn from Connecticut's approach or your approach in Connecticut? And anyone can start.
I'll give it a try. I mean, I think we actually, hopefully without like disclosing anything Shannon doesn't want me to disclose, we in the rate case, we had a gas rate case last year that we were in a similar position to CLF and Sierra Club on, and we kind of had a discussion at the outset of that rate case about like trying to use the rate case itself as an advocacy, as a tool to kind of create a, like, to fill the gap essentially that Shannon described in her slides for the kind of guidance that's missing in Connecticut, whether that's in statute or from our Department of Energy, from our missing CES or what have you. I hesitated before raising that as an example because, as Shannon noted, it didn't work last time around. We ultimately got a great result on behalf of ratepayers on that rate case, like a good rate impact result, but unfortunately, the work that we put in, specifically advocating for a future gas proceeding, non-pipe alternative consideration, coordinated planning process between electric and gas companies, none of that kind of made its way into that decision for reasons we're not sure of. I do think though, like we're giving it another shot in a present rate case. We're not giving up, but I would just sort of raise that as an example. Maybe although it didn't work here, I think it was kind of a neat idea to kind of get creative about like trying to sort of create a policy standard from where we sat in the absence of other standards. So it'd be cool if other states gave that a try also.
Yeah, one more thing I would add to that, although the final decision was a disappointment from the greenhouse gas standpoint, I think that was a good opportunity to educate commissioners and utility commission staff on these issues. There were a few orders in that final decision for the Avangrid gas companies that relate to like disclosure around their internal greenhouse gas reduction targets and ESG and so on. And so even though it didn't get the outcome that we wanted, I think there were some benefits just to airing out this issue and getting education for the regulators.
I know one issue the legislature is looking at is trying to continue funding for barrier remediation for energy efficiency. So mold, asbestos, knob and tube, things that block insulation or other energy efficiency improvements from being implemented. The legislature was able to put aside some American Rescue Plan funding to get a program started. And I think that particularly with our older housing stock in cities like New Haven, it can be a real challenge. Like more than a third, close to half of buildings won't be able to, or at least smaller, older buildings won't be able to be addressed in a more meaningful way.
Thanks all. I think any opportunity to sort of creatively advance our goals here is those ideas are welcome in a lot of states right now. Questions from the chat. Could each panelist address a policy or policies they think Connecticut should be investing in to further building decarbonization that hasn't been mentioned yet?
I can start on this one. I dropped this into the chat, but lately I've been thinking more about financing models that can be used to advance electrification and energy efficiency. And one thing that I think we should be considering in Connecticut is the implementation of inclusive utility investment programs, which are sometimes known as pay as you save. Because we do have rebates and we have some financing programs at the Connecticut Green Bank, but they really have not been sufficient to accelerate electrification at the speed that we'd like to see. And there's also some equity concerns that they're not reaching the people who most need financing tools. And so I'd love to see more exploration in this direction.
You know, Shannon, you mentioned some, and all of you at some point in your presentations managed some equity concerns and questions. What would you say are some of the most significant equity challenges that are arising in your work?
I can start it. Oh no, I saw Shannon, you go first. I saw you.
No, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I mentioned that as OCC, we're involved in most of the programs at PURA, including rate cases, but PURA's also, we have a lot of different programs in Connecticut that are funded by ratepayers through regulatory programs like our net metering, clean energy programs. We have storage. We have something called the Shared Clean Energy Facility, which is sort of like community solar, and we have an EV program, et cetera. It is a growing concern of OCC, like as these programs grow. A lot of them are sort of in the early stages. We're only starting to get some data about participation, but the data doesn't look great, showing that deployment is equitable, at least from like what we understand about, like from the data that we can see. That isn't, I want to emphasize that PURA designed all of these programs with strong equity components, things like adders for distressed municipality, bid preference. The programs are modeled to achieve, at least 40% deployment in low income or distressed communities, but it's not happening. And one of the barriers, frankly, to us being able to kind of make sure that we can get a sense of whether this stuff is working is we've been really struggling to get the utilities to partner with us in terms of being able to get better data. And specifically, we've been, in the context of our performance-based regulations proceedings, trying to get the utilities to help us get to a point where we could use census data as an overlay over their customer data, with all the caveats of census data being stale, et cetera. Right now we have nothing. Like right now we're guessing based on like average income based on zip code. Like that's the best we have to kind of get a sense of where stuff is ending up and social demographics for customers. So it's tough. We're having a lot of struggles with regard to equity, but that is one thing that we're moving towards, and it feels like we are making some progress that we might be able to get like the utilities to kind of invest in the IT infrastructure to kind of get to overlay census data over their billing, so we can all finally get a sense of what's actually happening out there.
Yeah, I would add that in a city like New Haven, about 7 in 10 people rent, and a lot of the housing stock, I'd say roughly half in poorer neighborhoods, are 1 to 4 family properties, and it can be really challenging to get those properties involved in energy efficiency. I mentioned barrier remediation. There's obviously the landlord-tenant split incentive, and then there's really nothing in solar programs that reach those unless you have a very motivated landlord. And it's really challenging. I think we have a lot more work to do there.
Yeah, I think that can be said sort of across the board. A lot more work to do to ensure an equitable path forward. Peter Millman in the chat notes that utilities have generally expressed support for a future of gas docket. So where's the opposition coming from?
Yeah, this is a big question. So it is correct that our gas distribution utilities are on the record as supporting a future of gas docket. I should say that is in the context of kind of excusing their inaction and saying that they need a statewide proceeding before they can plan, which is obviously problematic. But everyone seems to be in support of future of gas. OCC, various environmental interveners like CLF, the utilities, the state agency. So it's not clear. I suspect, if I'm going to speculate, that it has to do with some of the political dynamics we've talked about and the challenges there. But it's not clear.
Yeah, I think Shannon mentioned the focus the state had for many years on expanding gas, and gas continuing to be the cheapest option for heating. I think leads to people in the legislature and elsewhere saying like, well, why would we want to move away from gas? It's not the message that folks have been broadcasting for many years, and if you're just looking at the short term, it looks like the cheap and easy option.
I would echo what Shannon said. I think like one of the other dynamics we have in Connecticut, which I think is like increasingly common across the country, but maybe not yet, is that all of our investor-owned gas companies are also owned by investor-owned electricity companies. So which kind of, in this context, maybe, I mean, it creates some interesting incentives, I guess, generally. But in this context, I think that might have something to do with why the utilities are open to this idea. I think that it would benefit their ultimate parent company bottom line if there were a planful, like if they can see a future where they can essentially like shift their revenues from one business to another and not take any losses. I think that they are on board with that. But as Shannon referenced before, what's also quite clear is that they have no interest at all in taking any step toward that unless they are certain that they've got a deal, essentially. So although they have supported a future of gas docket, I also, they've been supporting a future of gas docket in response to the advocacy of others. I have not seen them sort of leading the charge for this, either for the docket and especially not leading the charge for how to actually, taking any responsibility for doing this without explicit direction and guarantees from the state.
There's always that nuance that makes things more complicated than they seem. Steve, I think I speak for everyone when we say we're ecstatic that New Haven has been able to hold on to the CPRG money and is moving ahead with the project. But I wonder if you or maybe Shannon have thought about other potential ways to fund TENS projects.
Well, I think the other piece of our project obviously is the ITC, and that I think is like the biggest lever, and would be the biggest loss if it's phased out prematurely or eliminated entirely. And for us, the direct pay piece is really important. Our project's structured around being able to rely on the elective direct pay process. Beyond that, we haven't really given much thought to other funding strategies. We have given some thought to, how we would bill and administer the system. So I think, yeah, I don't know if Shannon has other ideas on other ways to fund something like this.
Yeah, I think there's some nascent conversations in Massachusetts thinking about some alternative financing mechanisms, like using state bonding and having like the boreholes financed that way, and having essentially like a public-private partnership. So yeah, I think that is another area that could be explored that has promise.
Okay. We're just about ending time. I will note that question came from the chat, and we do have some resources on our website as well that we'll try and drop in the chat in the last couple of minutes. With 2 minutes left, one sentence, if you can, from each of you. What is one opportunity in Connecticut you're most excited about that'll lead to progress in the next 5 years?
Okay, I can jump in. What I would love to see is for Connecticut not to duplicate the work that has been done and the progress that has been made in other states, including New York and Massachusetts. And I would love to kind of build on those states' efforts and thermal energy network pilot projects, future of gas proceedings, and so on, and take those learnings and implement them here.
I'll say I'm very excited about us finally finishing our performance-based regulation proceeding in Connecticut. It's been going on since 2021 now, so I'm actually supposed to be in a technical meeting right now about that docket. I was there this morning and I jumped out for this call. So we've all put a lot of work into it. I have a lot of faith that it can do a lot of good in the long term. I don't think it's going to be. I heard someone once refer to PBR as an evolution rather than a revolution. I think that's right. I don't think that we're going to see a massive rate decrease. I think that it might not seem impactful at first to ratepayers, like once it does roll out, but I think that there is a lot of promise just in the power of adjusting the incentive structures for utilities to better align with the state's goals. I think that could really help, help the momentum towards getting to better places. So that's my optimism.
I would say looking at places where we have a reliance on electric resistance, whether for heating or domestic hot water and delivered fuels, and seeing where there are opportunities for the state to really zoom in on beneficial electrification that's not going to mean a massive overhaul of the grid in the short run and allow us to make the argument that we're immediately lowering people's costs. I think it can help us meet these kind of challenging dilemma of trying to both reduce costs and also meet our climate goals.
Great. Thank you for a little optimism at the end there. Thanks again to Shannon, Tom, and Steve, and all the attendees, our Trailblazer members. Reminder, we will send out the recording over email, and it'll also be available on our website. Thank you, and have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you.